Hello and welcome to another video and podcast from FFScout.co.uk. My name is David and today we're going to be continuing our series of FPL Scout Reports where we look at new players coming to the Premier League, some players who have changed one Premier League club for another, or in some instances, new managers as well. And it is the middle of those three categories that we are going to operate today, because we are going to have a look at one Mason Mount, who has joined Man United for an initial fee of 55 million. It's one of the biggest transfer stories of the summer, and of course he's already made his debut for the Red Devils, and many people are wondering whether he's going to be worth signing for FPL, but more importantly they're wondering whether or not there's going to be an impact on Bruno Fernandes, who has come down in price this year. There's a lot of interest in him. You can make a 0.5 saving on Rashford, so you've got Rashford at 9 million, Fernandes at 8.5, Mounts at 7. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to have a look at what we think is going to happen for these two players, in particular Mount and Fernandes at United. Have a look at what Mount has done in the past, assess whether or not he can be useful as an FPL asset this season, and of course work out whether or not his role in the team is going to damage Bruno's output from a fantasy perspective. So lots of questions here, and there's also lots of really interesting numbers to help us assess that, which is just another good opportunity for me to remind you guys that if you haven't already signed up for your Fantasy Football Scout membership for the new season, then now is the best time to do it. You can save up to 30% with those pre-season prices, and one of the many things you're going to get access to is the members area, where you've got just an array of tools and tables, stats, all sorts of stuff to help you answer your own questions. We've got heat maps, touch maps, we've got shop maps, absolutely everything you need perhaps to answer some of the questions that I've been going through in these videos. And as I keep saying, if you're fed up of listening to me answer the questions, just sort your membership out and you can go to the members area and you can answer those questions without my help, which is just better for everybody, right? So yeah, make sure you get sorted with that. And of course, it also includes access to the preseason minute spreadsheet for the preseason, which is a very useful tool for working out who are the preferred players going into the new season, season points projections, team transfer planners, and drafts, and the best fantasy managers, including some previous winners. So with that, let's jump into the story of Mason Mount and what it means for managers this year. And just one final plug, actually. This comes from a very fantastic article written by Mark in the editorial department. Him alongside Neil and Tom have been doing some great content this season. So make sure you give their articles a read as well if you want more details. So thank you very much, Mark, for that. It forms the basis of a lot of the research that we've got here. And so yeah, Mason Mount. I mean, many of us know the story of Mason Mount quite well, but of course, you know, the most recent season that he's had has very much pushed him to the periphery of fantasy football. But when I was going over what he'd done in the past, it just reminded me there was a time when this man did command a place in fantasy squads, because he's always been very good value, because he's never really been priced, above sort of like 8 million, 8.5, that sort of thing. Always been a very good mid-price midfielder, and in that situation, he can offer some value and has offered value in the past, and so could he do it again at Man United? That is the question. Well, let's have a jump back and remind ourselves of what he is capable of. So, yeah, it was 2019 it was that Chelsea got rid of Eden Hazard to Real Madrid. And they weren't able to sign a replacement because they had that transfer embargo. And so it's quite an incredible story, really, because he had Lampard coming in as the club legend, as the new manager. It was a different approach for them managerially, because normally Chelsea cycle through big names, and so he had a bit of a meteoric rise in terms of management from Derby to Chelsea, and he brought along with him Mason Mount, who was, of course, already in and around Chelsea, but had a good season at Derby as well. He was just 20 years old, and he was very much used as the closest possible replacement you could have to some sort of creative player in the squad, having lost that playmaker in Hazard. He'd been in the Chelsea Academy since 2005. He got 9 goals when he was out on loan with Vitesse Arnhem. Was in the Eredivisie Team of the Year, which actually is going to become relevant a little bit later, because Erik ten Hag was very aware of that, of course, operating in Holland at the time. 9 goals for Derby as well when he was there as well. And so the view was, he's 20, it doesn't matter, he's ready to go. And he hit the ground running. He basically just dropped straight into that Chelsea team and didn't look like someone who'd been playing EFL football and Eredivisie football up until that point. And so, yeah, what we've got on the screen right now is his FPL history, which began in 2019-20, his first campaign, 32 starts, 7 goals, 6 assists, 137 points. Went even better the next season, 2020-21, 32 starts, 6 goals, 7 assists, 147 points. His best ever season, 21-22, 27 starts, so actually fewer starts than the previous campaign, but 11 goals, 11 assists, double figures for both, and 169 points. And so, yeah, incredible FPL pedigree there. 169 points in the 21-22 season was his best campaign. Just sort of, summing it up broadly, so that's 13 attacking returns in both 1920 and 2021 season. That season ended with him getting an assist for Kai Havertz's goal in the Champions League final. These are pretty impressive feats. And then the following year, as we said, was one of his best. And interestingly enough, he was one of only 7 FPL players in the 21-22 season to get double digits for both goals and assists. He peaked at 2.6 million owners in that campaign. Got a hat-trick in Gameweek 9 against Norwich. He got an assist in that game because it was a 7-0 win. Got 24 points. 19 points against Southampton in Gameweek 32. So this guy was doing bits. This was a guy who we needed in our teams quite often. And there was never a time where we felt like we were paying too much for him, which was quite nice. All of that is why 22-23 was just such a horrendous season for him, because he'd gone into that campaign, he'd been voted player of the season twice in a row, but just 82 points in 22-23. Pelvic injuries really didn't help with the campaign. Of course, with 3 different managers, there wasn't really much clear direction at Chelsea. That didn't help either. He only got more than 5 FPL points in a match on 3 occasions last time. Of course, Chelsea finished 12th. And so, it was just never a point in the campaign where we felt like we needed to have him, which was a big change. And as I said, it's weird in a way. I'd forgotten just how important he was to our teams, as much as 18 months ago, just because of just how bad last season is. Can he replicate that at Man United? Possibly, because we can have a look at some of the mitigating factors as to why last season was so bad for him. In effect, what I think we're going to see in this little section is that this is not a player who is finished in terms of FPL potential. He just got caught in the perfect storm at Chelsea, like many other players. Raheem Sterling was another with good FPL pedigree, went to Chelsea, had a bad campaign. For example, many other players just had a really bad season there because of lots of different factors impacting on Chelsea's campaign. And so what we've got on the screen now, and this is more from the FPL, from the Fantasy Football Scout members area now, rather than just FPL points. We've got some touch heat maps here, so you can access these in full interactive detail if you've got your membership sorted, and some stats about where he was shooting from and where he was touching the ball. So we'll start with the touch maps first, and it's a progression from right to left of the 2021 campaign, the 21-22 campaign, and the 22-23 campaign. And what you see is a massive drop-off in penalty box involvement. And so we'll start with 2020-21 campaign first. He was predominantly being used on the left-hand side of midfield in a 3, but there was lots of involvement on the right-hand side, but there was just a bit more on the left. But crucially, there was lots and lots of penalty box entries from both sides, where he was cutting inside to shoot, perhaps, or maybe laying it across for somebody else. In effect, heavily involved in the penalty box. Then 21-22 campaign, which of course was his best. You can see that basically there's just like a big push of that orange blob on both sides, closer to the penalty box, fewer involvements in his own half. And so then the penalty box entries become even more concentrated, especially on the right-hand side. So this is what's quite interesting, is that in both of those heat maps, 2020-21 and 21-22, he was getting a lot of touches on both sides because he can play on both sides of a central midfield situation. But it was more the right-hand side that he was effective in 21-22. And you can see there's like an angry orange extension from his right-hand side involvement that really just swamps one corner of the penalty box. And that's one of the reasons why he was able to put up 11 goals, 11 assists. And even when he was on the left-hand side, there's slightly less penalty box entries than the previous campaign, but still enough. And just across the board, again, we're just seeing him being able to get into the box and be effective. And so then the 22-23 campaign is when it all sort of changed. And you can see that it's very much a case of where he's being utilised. And that is what negatively impacted his ability to be involved. And, of course, injuries as well. But key factor is he was being used on the left sometimes, on the right sometimes. But up until that point, it looks as if the right-hand side was where he was perhaps more effective, and then he was switched to basically just the left-hand side. When you look at the touch heap map, so 22-23 is a big orange splodge on the left-hand side and just a smattering of touches and a smattering of orange and yellow on the right-hand side. And so, the biggest thing here is just the penalty box entries massively down. There's hardly any yellow in there at all. I can see a slight drop, but it's mostly just a sort of smattering of blue, which means very few touches in the penalty box. Huge drop off there. And I mean, to be perfectly honest, I think the main thing is that Mount is a player who's very good at operating in lots of different places. He can operate quite well with a free roll. And so in those 2 seasons where he did very well, he was able to contribute heavily in all areas. But then, in the most recent campaign, it was like he just got put in one place and it wasn't working for him. It limited his ability to get in the box. Of course, other things around him weren't doing great either. So, there may have been some runs into the box that just weren't finding him, for example, but yeah, that's what happened. We just saw like a huge drop off there. Let's have a look at some of the stats behind this then. So 2020-21 campaign, 83.3% of his goals were in the box. 21-22, 81.8% of his goals were in the box. And then last season, just 33.3% of his goals came from inside the box. We see the same with the touches as well. Running through 2021, 2022, and 22-23. So those 3 campaigns, 140 in the first of those, 145 in the second, just 62 in the second one. Shots inside the box. Interestingly enough, there's some weird fluctuation here because 43.9% of his shots were in the box in 2020-21, 63% in 21-22, and down to 57.6% last time out. And then shots outside the box, 56.1%, then 36.8%, then 42.4% as well. And so, broadly speaking, summing all that up, because I appreciate that was a lot of numbers, and we've kind of already covered it already. When this guy is given the opportunity to operate in his best areas, he's going to do very well. And when he is not able to get anywhere near the box, he is not going to be quite as effective for attacking returns. And that in many ways is why he wasn't a useful asset last season. So the question is, if he can be used in his best way, is he going to get back in the box? And if he's playing in a better team, which arguably Man United are compared to Chelsea last season, could see him get in the box more often as well, which of course is going to set off a little alarm bell at the back of your head because you're thinking, well, if he's getting involved in and around the box, what does that mean for Bruno? Well, we'll come on to that in a little bit. What's really interesting about Mount is actually what he does off the ball, and is actually probably one of my favourite things about him. It's one of my favourite things of watching him. Just forget FPL for 1 second. If I want to sit down, just watch a game from a purist perspective and sit down and enjoy some off-the-ball intelligence and pestering, and Mason Mount is one of my favourite players to watch. This is one of the reasons why he's been very popular with all of his coaches, basically everywhere. Frank Lampard was singing his praises at the very beginning, at Derby and then Chelsea. He continued to be used as extensively as possible when fit, even if they were going to put him in the wrong place, by every Chelsea manager who's worked with. Gareth Southgate's been a big fan of him as well. And another big fan is Eric Steele, former Man United coach who worked with Mount for the England under-19s as well, who said he knows the game. He's a very intelligent player. He can score goals. He's one of the most perfect 10s I've seen. He was our front line, our maestro. He set the tone, good with both feet. Then he can see a pass, which is important, and he would go beyond the front man. He's great at nicking the ball, which will suit Ten Hag. He is not a tackler. He nicks the ball off people. He's clever. And those of you who know journalist Carl Anker, you may know from Twitter, for example, or X, I think we're supposed to call it now, described him as a professional pest for the way that he harasses opponents. And so that could be a bit of a clue as to where we may see him used at United. And as we said, we have seen some pre-season games, which we'll come on to in a little bit as well. And so it makes you wonder if perhaps maybe Ten Hag is going to be thinking about using him where he used Eriksen last season, who, of course, not getting any younger and, sometimes struggles to finish matches. And so, Mount obviously is a big upgrade, fitness and youthful exuberance-wise. On that, he's a much more active player who is able to make those runs into the box, as those touch heat maps showed us. So, all of those things bode well for him doing well at United. But yes, we have to answer the question, though, what does that mean for the players currently at the club? And so, continuing with some extra extracts from the members area, we've got some touch heat maps now for Casemiro, Eriksen, and Fernandes. Have a look at those now. So they work largely as you'd expect. Casemiro has a nice coverage between his own box on the touch map and the halfway line, and there is some involvement in the opponent's half, but predominantly the most condensed splodges of orange are in that defensive role, which is what you'd expect. Eriksen has a similar sort of layout, but it's flipped because the predominant of his touches are between the halfway line and the opponent's box, but there is still a lot of dropping deep going on there. And then with Fernandes, not a tremendous amount of dropping deep, and he pretty much just swarms both the left and right hand side of the attacking third, as a sort of number 10 who likes to drift out wide and 10 from the left or 10 from the right. He's very, very good at that. And so that's what we saw last season. And so it's where Mount is going to fit into that we are intrigued by, because, of course, Eriksen doesn't have many penalty box entries here. Neither does Casemiro. Fernandes has a fair few, and Mount is very good at that. If you want to get the best out of Mount, you want to be able to have him getting into the box. And so is he going to push Fernandes into an Eriksen role, put Eriksen on the bench, and then Mount play the Fernandes role? That's what some people are wondering. So some of the options that present themselves at United, instead of a 4-2-3-1 where Casemiro and Eriksen sit behind Fernandes, it could instead be a 4-3-3 where you've got two advanced number 8s maybe, as Fernandes naturally tends to lean left, and Mount obviously did best on the right-hand side in that season at Chelsea. He could then lean right, and then you have two number 8s. So it's a possible way they can both actually operate well in this team. But, of course, it would involve a slight change of shape as well. Now, the interesting thing about Mount is he can play on the wide areas as well, and we saw that sometimes at Chelsea. He could go out wide if Rashford's going to go through the middle. Now, some of us don't necessarily think that's Rashford's best place to be, but as things stand, United haven't quite secured the services of a new and recognised number 9. Although there's rumblings here and there of a few names. But even if they sign someone, it would only take an injury or two, or perhaps some rotation for Rashford to go for the middle. Maybe Mount gets out wide. But let's hear from the man himself. What does Mason think of where he could play at United? Well, he had a chat with the Man United website, obviously, when he signed, and he said, "I've always seen myself as a midfielder, a number 8 that can obviously get forward, attack, try and score goals, create goals, but also to be able to do the other side as well and defend and help the team where we're under pressure." I mean, in effect, that's the description of a number 8. So I sort of feel like a 4-3-3 where you've got two number 8s in Fernandes and Mount would make some sense. But of course, we are very lucky. We are blessed with the fact that United have actually started playing their preseason games, and Mount has already played 3 times. Before I go too further on all of this preseason information we've learned, mentioned earlier about the preseason minute spreadsheet. Make sure you're using that 23-24 season preseason guide on the Fantasy Football Scout website, because of course that's going to tell you how many minutes every single player in the entire game has played in the preseason, what positions they've played in, how they rank compared to their colleagues as well. And you will need to have signed up for your membership to be able to get full access to that. There's a few things I can pull out, for example, at the moment, in that Mason Mount is the joint third most utilised United player in preseason. He's played 45 minutes in all 3 games so far. Now, the likes of Fernandes and Casemiro have all only been involved in 1 game, Eriksen as well, which of course in no way means that those 3 aren't important players. Sometimes in pre-season, you see the biggest players perhaps miss the first 1 or 2, if they're not quite ready yet. You don't want to risk them, for example. So we're not going to read too much into the lack of involvement from Bruno and Casemiro, for example, but I think it is very encouraging that Mount is already being used quite extensively. 45 minutes in each match so far, which is fairly solid. Managers tend to play, 2-11 sometimes in the first 2 or 3 games, and then it's when you progress to the bigger games that they start trying to treat that as close to a Premier League game as you can, with maybe making your subs after the hour mark, for example. So in his first game, how did Mount get on? Well, he was used as a number 8, although it was in a 4-2-3-1 formation, so there's a little bit of liquidity about the way that the team was in and out of possession. According to our very own editorial team, who have been covering these games in extensive detail, according to Tom, who was covering this one, he said that Mason was buzzing around midfield and then was withdrawn at half-time, but played a part in some of United's best attacking moments and was involved in set pieces. So let's hear from the man himself about how he enjoyed that role. It was a 2-0 win against Leeds. He said, I really like that role today, being able to drop in and get on the ball and start the play from a bit deeper. Ooh, that sounds good. That sounds good for Fernandes owners. But also having that freedom to be able to get forward and get in the box. I tried to make the runs in behind and help the press from the front. I had that chance just by starting off the press. And then Ten Hag was also impressed with him as well. Asked about Mount's debut, he said it was great the first time, but we could expect this level of performance. I think for him it's just his first because he has so much skills, and I'm sure we will take so much joy from him, and he will continue to contribute to our performance. We need players who score free kicks. He will bring dynamism into our game, and that was one of our conclusions last season. His vision is to play the offensive, but also he wants to be multifunctional. He wants to be complete. When you're playing in midfield, you have to attack, but you also have to defend. We need to be more dynamic in the midfield department. I'm sure he will contribute to the success of United because he is a quality player. Now, from that debut and the way that things are being discussed, there's a couple of key markers there that I think can ease our concerns about Fernandes, because we've already talked about Mason sort of coming out and saying, enjoying that deeper side of things. Then we've got the manager talking about what he's going to contribute going forward, but being very, very explicit about what he also wants him to bring deeper than that in terms of defensive roles. Now, we know that Bruno is very good at that. I actually think he's one of the best people at winning the ball back deeper in midfield and then setting the tone in the Premier League, despite also being one of the best number 10s. He's a very, very complete player, so he can do that, but we're not seeing quite so much of that line being pushed about him. So that's encouraging. And it gets even better because the most recent United game, they beat Arsenal 2-0. It's no mean feat, of course, with Arsenal challenging for the title last year. There was some individual errors in that game, of course, and they are sort of rebuilding their midfield potentially this season with Rice coming in. Havertz played as well, and so Rice, Havertz, and Ødegaard hadn't played together as a three before, obviously, and it sounds like they were a little bit rusty in terms of getting that to work, which makes sense. That's what preseason's all about. So a few mitigating factors. We should read something into the fact they beat Arsenal, but not loads of things. The most important thing is what happened when Fernandes and Mount took to the field at the same time together, which was nice. This was the first chance we had to see that. Fernandes did start in a more advanced role than Mount, but there were still instances where they kind of swapped, and so then Mount pushed forward and Fernandes dropped deeper. Sounds somewhat similar to that suggestion that maybe they sort of both play a number 8 role, but with Fernandes perhaps a little bit further forward, closer to that of a 10. So maybe we can call him an 8.5, which of course is his FPL price, which could be apt as well. So that's what we've seen so far. There's a couple more games to come for United that are, against decent opposition. They've got Wrexham coming up. They've got Real Madrid and then Dortmund, which are big games. And as you get closer to the start of the season, we hopefully will see a proper first team named, especially for those last 2 matches, which will tell us just exactly where we think people are going to play. So do keep an eye on that. Fantasy Football Scout is the best place to do that, of course. But bringing this all to a conclusion then, what do we think are our final learnings from what we've looked back at what Mount's done in the past, we've looked back at where he's been used best, where he was used worst, where he could fit into that United midfield. What does that mean for him, Fernandes, etc.? We were after. So first things first, I think that Mount is going to be very overlooked this season because of how bad his season was last time out. And the 7 million price actually means that maybe he could offer decent value this season if he can get back to what he did in the 21-22 campaign. Now, he arguably isn't as good an asset on paper just yet compared to Fernandes and Rashford, so he's not even the second best midfield asset at his club. Going into the season, he's the third best, really. But that price could be useful because if you want to double up on the United attack and you haven't quite got enough money, I wouldn't be too surprised if there's a situation where fairly early on Mount does well and you go for Rashford and Mount, or Fernandes and Mount versus Fernandes and Rashford, which is, that's a big saving. So we could see that. His price point is also quite useful as well, because Sterling, Kulusevski, Bowen and Burmo, Brighton midfielders as well, all in the same category. So you could maybe start with the Brighton one and then move on to Mount once you've had a chance to see him get involved, for example, or go the other way around. If you've got an inkling about Mount, you can maybe switch to a Chelsea midfielder or a Spurs midfielder, because their fixtures obviously get better from game week 3, for example. Bowen, his fixtures take a while to get good, so maybe you could give Mount the first 9. In all likelihood, you're probably not going to go for Mount from the beginning, but I do think you should keep an eye on those preseason games just to see how involved he gets. The set pieces, we've touched on that briefly, are important. Now, him coming to the club probably isn't going to damage Fernandes' role in that, because he was already sharing set pieces with a few others, such as Luke Shaw, for example. Mount is probably not going to be able to get all of them, but he's already had an involvement in some. So if he does very, very well, maybe he can wrestle them away. So keep an eye on that as well. The knock-on effect on Fernandes then, where we will finish, is that what we can see so far is it's not hampering Fernandes' ability to play more advanced. In fact, you could even argue that having them both in the midfield, and the fact that they're both pretty good at long distance shots, and the fact that they're both, when playing number 8 roles, very good at making penalty box entries, they could actually make each other better, because Mount is a very creative player. So when Fernandes makes those runs into the box, he's going to have better service from his fellow number 8. Vice versa, Mount is a good finisher when he's put in the right positions. Fernandes is going to thread a ball through for Mount breaking into the box. Then it's an enhancement in terms of the finishing ability of what's around Fernandes. So it maybe boosts his assist potential as well. Famously, he was an incredible creator last season, especially in the last 12 game weeks. 14 big chances created. That was double the amount created by those who were joint third for that stat. It's just nuts. So he's a great creator. We know that already. And having Mount around and what we know he can do in front of goal could actually improve that. So I'm not too worried, if I'm honest, about what Mount means for Fernandes. And I'm actually cautiously optimistic that we can still see Fernandes looking pretty good, maybe even better, because of having Mount around. And I wouldn't be too surprised if we maybe see a double up of Mount and another Man United midfielder this season, if we can get Mount playing his best football. I mentioned earlier, of course, that Erik ten Hag, had noticed how well he'd done in Holland. Apparently, he's reported as trying to sign Mount for Ajax some years ago. And so he's clearly a player that he loves when he's at his best. And so we can be fairly confident that he is going to make sure that he gets the best out of him, because it's a player he's wanted to work with for some time. So I think that things are looking good for him. I think they're looking good for Fernandes as well. And so, only time will tell. We need a bit more answers from those preseason games. But of course, you will get all that information with us on Fantasy Football Scout. So don't miss a thing. Of course, sign up for that membership as well. Save up to 30% of the preseason prices, so that you don't even need to wait for me to tell you what's happening in those preseason games, because you'll know yourself. As I said, you don't need me. That's what membership's for. And of course, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the Fantasy Football Scout YouTube channel, and hit that bell notification so that you do not miss a thing this preseason. And so with that, I will leave you fine folks to the rest of your FPL tinkering, and I will see you next time.